G'day everyone, my name is Hoy. I'm going to show you how to combine this background with this model to come up with this composite. We're going to learn two key concepts. One is to put the model into perspective so she doesn't look like a giant against the background. Once we've figured out the perspective and where to place her, we're going to learn how to adjust the luminosity, the hue, the saturation, and then put various rim lights around her so she's embedded within the scene. To add a final touch, we're going to add a little bit of noise so she can blend in with the background. So if you want to follow along, the links to both images are in the description. Okay, so let's get started by opening the two images that we'll be using. I'm going to press Command or Control O, click and drag both files, and let's press Open. And we've got two images in two tabs here. We've got to bring one image into the other. And since we're on this image, I'm going to click and drag, hold until I get to this image, and I'm going to press Shift and then release my mouse. What Shift does is place it in the center of the background canvas. Now this image here is actually larger than the background canvas, so I'm going to press Command T on my keyboard. That's Control T if you're on a PC. So let's zoom out a bit, Command or Control 0 to see our full bounding box. I'm going to resize this proportionally and from the center by pressing Shift and Option, the Shift and Alt if you're on a PC, click and drag, something like this. And don't worry too much about the size of it. We're going to resize it a little bit later when we get to perspective. So let's accept the change by clicking on this check mark, or you could press Return or Enter on your keyboard. Now, before we get to the next step, let's rename our layers because we're all professionals here and we don't want to get mixed up with which layer is which. The next step is to make a mask out of this. So let's go to our Object Selection tool here, or you can press W on your keyboard. Let's click once here. Photoshop's going to have a think about it. When it's made the selection, let's zoom in a little bit so we can inspect the mask. And I can see here that it's not taken everything here, and if I scan down here, there's also a little bit here that it hasn't taken out. We'll start off with this first. So to remove this little bit here, I'm going to press Option or Alt on my keyboard, and your cursor will turn into this minus symbol here, and then we're going just to select and drag and make a selection to cut it out of the main selection. So let's move up. I've got spacebar, press on my keyboard, click and hold. And now to add this to the selection, what I'm going to do is press Shift and then click and drag to add it to the selection. Let's press the mask button here. And the mask isn't perfect, so this isn't a masking tutorial which goes into the detail of how to perfect the mask. I do have other tutorials that will cover masking in detail, so if you're wanting to check that out, please check out the links in the description. For the time being, we'll do some quick refinements on the mask by double clicking on the mask here, and that will give us the select and mask screen. Let's press on Refine Hair. And there are some edges that are not smooth, so we'll just smooth it out. So I'm on this view here. Let's click on black, and you can see that here it's very jaggedy. So let's click outside of that, and let's try to smooth it as much as possible without ruining the mask. So something like 15, and then let's play around with the feather. That's probably too much there. Maybe something like a 0.8 maybe, and then you can see that there is some transparency there which we'll fix later. So let's scroll down, and in our output settings, let's output it to a layer mask and press OK. Now let's deal with some of the transparency here. I'm going to view this mask in the bigger view, so press Option or Alt and click on this mask, and let's get our brush B on the keyboard, and let's change our mode from normal to overlay. And what overlay does is, if I have white as the foreground color, it will just paint those areas that are closer to white into white, and the black areas will just leave it alone. So Now I'm going very quickly here, so when you have your image, please take the time to mask it out nicely. I'm just going to flip the foreground color of my brush by pressing X on the keyboard, and you can see here black is my foreground color, and I'm just going to fix this up a tiny bit. I'm going to resize my brush. The left bracket key will resize it smaller and the right bracket key will make it bigger. And I'm going to press Option or Alt on my keyboard, click on the mask, and that will bring us back to this picture. So let's zoom out again. And the next question is, where do we put this model? Depending on where you put it, if I just grab my Move tool V on the keyboard, she could look big or small. So the question is, well, where exactly do we put it? And that's where perspective comes in. So we got to match the perspective of the background to the foreground. And we can do that by understanding where the horizon line is. To do that, we'll need to make some converging lines. It all sounds so complicated at this stage, but don't worry, I'll walk you through step by step. Let's start off with the background layer. So I'm going to turn the visibility of this off. Let's go to our line segment tool here. Click and hold until you see the line tool here, and I've got a stroke of this magenta color so it can stand out from the background here. If you need to change your color, just click on that and then you can select the color you want from here. And then my line has got a 20 pixel width, and what we're going to do is click and drag along this curve, something like this, even outside the canvas, and then we're going to draw another line from this side of the curve. So click and drag so it intersects, something like this, and you can see that it's converging here. Where the two lines meet is the horizon. The horizon is basically where the land meets the sky, and because the building's in the way, we can't see where the land is. So this is the approximate latitude of where the horizon is. Now we need to do the same for the model layer. So let's go to our model layer, just click on that and click on the model layer. Now this time we want a different stroke just so we can differentiate ourselves from the background. So let's click on that, and I'm going to select maybe a bright green and then press OK. Click here outside of that, and for simplicity let's toggle all these off, and let's deactivate the mask by pressing Shift and clicking on the mask. And now let's put it to the center first. So let's use our Move tool V on the keyboard, click and drag. And now let's get our line segment tool again. We're going to do the same. So click and drag, click and drag. Remember, where these two lines intersect is the horizon. So now that we've got two horizon marks, let's turn on the visibility of all these layers now. I'm going to bring back our mask by pressing Shift and clicking on the mask, and now we can see both images. Now what we need to do is line up the model layer where the intersect is with this intersection. So what we're going to do is go up back to our line 4, hold Shift on your keyboard and click on the model layer so all three layers are selected. Invoke our Move tool V on the keyboard, and now we're just going to move that somewhere where it intersects. You can see that I don't have X-ray vision, so I can't see exactly where the magenta lines intersect. So I'm going to click on the model layer and then just reduce the opacity so I can see both layers simultaneously. Going to zoom in, Option or Alt on my keyboard, and scroll wheel mouse up, and I was almost there, and this is good enough. It doesn't need to be exactly where the lines intersect, just roughly will give you a pretty good position already. So I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to increase my opacity back up. Well, not back down, back up I mean. And now I can disable these lines, or I can actually delete these lines actually. So click on line 4, Shift and click on line 3, delete on my keyboard, and do the same for line 2 and 1. And let's zoom out again. And this here is where the model is in perspective. She doesn't look too big or too small in the photo. Now, so long as I move the model along this horizontal axis, she will be in perspective. So what I mean by that, if I just click on the model layer here, if I press shift on my keyboard and I've got my move tool selected, if I move her along this horizontal axis here, she's always going to be in perspective. But if I move her up, then she looks a little bit weird and a little bit too big, right? So we don't want that. So I'm going to press Command Z to undo that. So let's just position her exactly where we want it. Maybe something like this. So now the next step is actually fix the color. You can see that she's not really integrated into the photo, right? She's a little bit too bright. The color's a bit off. You know that it's a little bit Photoshoppy, right? Because, well, it is Photoshop. So we need to fix the color of this. And the color has 3 elements. Those elements are luminosity, how bright or dark the picture is, the hue or the color of the photo, and then we've got to fix the saturation. So let's start off with fixing the luminosity, and we're going to use a check layer for that. So let's go to our adjustment layer icon. Let's create a solid color, and we're going to create a 50% gray layer. So 0 for the hue, 0 for the saturation, and the brightness be for 50%, and then we're going to press OK. And let's change the blend mode from normal to color, and you can see that we've changed the whole thing to black and white because we're going to just adjust the luminosity. We're going to disregard for the time being the color of this. Now this is just the check layer. I'm going to group it with itself so we don't get confused. So just make sure that this layer is selected, press Command or Control G, and let's rename this group to check layer. Let's also rename this to luminosity, because that's what we're checking for. Now that doesn't do anything. We need to make an adjustment layer, and the adjustment layer is the layer where we're going to make changes to, and we're going to use a curves adjustment layer to make the adjustment. So let's click on the model layer and then select curves, and we're going to clip this to the model layer. So let's press Option or Alt on our keyboard. You're going to see this down arrow, move it between the 2 layers, and then click, and you can see that this down arrow indicates this layer is clipped. There's generally 2 ways to adjusting your luminosity. One is just by eye, and one is a little bit more technical and scientific, which is a little bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. I have covered it in another tutorial, which you can see in the link down below. For the time being, we'll do it by eye, and the name of the game here is to adjust the luminosity of this model to the background, so matching the darkest point to the darkest point in the background, lightest point of the model to the lightest point in the background. The easiest way is to use the on image adjustment tool here, and now we're going to select the darkest area, which is her shorts, and we're just going to go down, all the way down just to see how dark it gets, and then all the way up just to see the range of how light it is. So now that we've got an idea, let's sort of just slow down our mouse movements here, and something like this looks okay. And for the light area, maybe somewhere on her sleeve, click and drag. So maybe something like this. And what I'm doing is comparing the white area to another white area in the background. So maybe here, I want to avoid comparison with the specular highlights because she's got no lights emanating from her. So it would be wrong to compare her brightest point to this light here. So the brightest point I think is somewhere here, and this looks like a match here. Now, if you're not happy with it and you want to keep adjusting it, you can also do so on the curve directly. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to click and drag that out of the curve and maybe just adjust the existing one, something like this. Maybe we'll do something like this. Now this isn't perfect. The beauty of adjustment layers is that you can always come back to it. Let's turn off our luminosity check layer and let's go back to the colored version and let's see before, after. It may be a little bit too dark, so let's adjust it like this, and we'll leave it like that for the time being. I should have also changed the blend mode from normal to luminosity, because that's what we want to see. Let's rename that to luminosity adjustment. because that's the actual adjustment that we use. The next step is to adjust the hue or the color of it. We're going to use another curves adjustment layer. So let's click on the adjustment layer icon. Let's go to curves and let's clip it once again. And let's rename that to hue adjustment. And let's change the blend mode to color because that's what we want to see. Now make sure that the curves icon is selected. Don't select the mask because it will create problems down the track. And we're going to press this auto button. But before you press the auto button, we need to press Option or Alt on our keyboard and then press Auto. So we're going to use the Find Dark and Light Colors option. And that will give us these options here, which basically ask us, well, what color do you want your shadows to be, your midtones to be, and your highlights? So let's click on this option here. For the shadows, I'm just going to pick something like this. And you can see that it's not actually pure black. It's got a blue tinge to it. So you can also keep clicking it until you're happy with it, or you can adjust it on this palette here, right? So something like this is okay for me. I'm going to press OK. And let's do the same for the midtones. Click on that. And I'm going to click on the midtones somewhere along this wall here. And you can see that it's not gray. It's actually this brownish orangey color here. I'm going to press OK. I'm going to press on the highlights. Again, I want to avoid selecting the specular highlights, right? Instead, I want to select, say, something like this on the ground, for example, and I'm okay with that. By the looks of it, I'm probably going to change the shadow a little bit lighter. So click and drag something like this. I'm going to press OK. It's going to ask me if I want these new colors as my default. So I'm going to press no, because if I press yes, the next time I'm going to do this auto option, it's going to apply the shadows and the midtone and the highlight colors that I just selected, which I don't want. So let's press no for that. Let's just check out the before and after. This is the before and after. Now, if you want to change anything after the fact, you can always come back to these curves here and then just play around with the red channel, green channel, and then the blue channel if you're not quite happy with it. For this one, there's probably a little more green than I wanted, so I'm just going to go to my green channel, click on that, and then just bring it down a little bit, and you can see the difference that makes. So maybe something like this. And that looks good to me. Now the next color element that we need to fix is the saturation level. We're also going to use an adjustment layer, but this time, no, it's not a curves adjustment layer. It's a hue saturation adjustment layer. So let's click on our adjustment layer icon and select saturation. Let's clip that to our layer below. Let's rename this and just delete the hue and delete the one. Let's change our blend mode from normal to saturation because that's the only thing that we're interested in for this layer. This one is as simple as clicking on this on image adjustment tool and then click and drag to the left for less saturation, or click and drag to the right for more saturation. You can see that the slider here also changes. So let me just do something like this, and you can see that it automatically selects the color, and I can do that for the hair. So something like this. The changes are very minute. So now what we want to do is embed the model even more by ensuring that the lighting around her falls onto her body. If I zoom in into her hands, for example, you can see that it is a little whitish, right? And if I just pan across here, her shirt is also a little bit too white considering her surroundings is yellow, orangey, brownish. So what we're going to do is add in that lighting so the highlights on her are actually yellow, not white. And we're going to do that by using luminosity masking, but not in the way that you probably know luminosity masking. I'll show you how quick and easy my method is. So let's create a solid color. And for the time being, we don't mind what color it is. So I'm going to press OK. Let's clip it to the layer below, Option on the keyboard or Alt on the PC. And then we're going to rename our layers to highlights, press return or enter on our keyboard. And what we're going to do is double click to the side of this layer, not the word, to the side, and that will bring up our layer style menu. And we're going to click on color overlay, the label, not this check mark here. And the reason why is we want these options here. I've selected color, you can see, of a magenta color, and that's because I want a color that actually stands out from the background, and the background or the model doesn't have any magenta. If you need to change your color, just click on that palette and this color picker will come up and choose the color that you want. Now let's go back up to blending options here, and what we're going to do is use the blend if sliders, specifically the underlying layer. So I'm going to click and drag to the right, and what I'm going to do is stop it when I have something like this. This is the area where the highlight should be, right? So it's something like this for the time being. I'm going to split these tab here by pressing Option or Alt on my keyboard, and that will just feather out the edges so the transition is not as harsh. Maybe something like this. And let's pan up just to see her hand. So whatever the effect I'm going to do is going to affect the purple area. So once I'm happy with that, let's press OK. Now that I've got the area marked out, I don't need to see the color overlay now. What I want to do is select the color of what I want that area to be. So let's double click on this solid color here, and let's select a color that is something like this. And you can see quite easily the highlights have absorbed that color now. So this is before and this is after. Now, if the effect is too strong, we can reduce the opacity, which maybe we should, down to say 70%. The reason why I like the blend if option to do luminosity masking is because if I want to change the area of the luminosity masking, I don't need to make another mask. All I have to do is double click again on the side of the layer, bring up our blend if tool, and just adjust my blend if sliders here, right? So look at that. So the next thing I want to do is just bring out some rim lights around her hair. So again, I'm going to use a solid color background, and I'm going to press OK for the time being, and I'm going to clip it to the underlying layer here. Let's rename our layers, double click on that, rim light. I'm going to double click on the solid color, and maybe let's select a color close to the lamp here. I'm going to press OK, and I'm just going to invert the mask here. So just make sure that the mask is selected and press Command or Control I, and that will hide everything. I'm going to just brush in the area that I want affected. So let me zoom in. I'm going to invoke my brush tool B on the keyboard, and I'm going to select white as my foreground color. I can reset it by pressing D on the keyboard, and that will bring white to the foreground. I want to make sure that my mode is on to normal, and then my flow is quite low, maybe 19%, 20%, something like this. And I'm going to increase my brush. A soft round brush will do. I'm just going to paint in very roughly the area that I want the reflection. So something like this. So now we're going to use the magical blend if tool. So let's double click on the side of the layer here and just move this out of the way. Something like this. Well, that's probably not good as well. So let's click on this. Let's split the tab. Option or Alt on your keyboard, click and split this. So maybe we want a little bit more. Okay, so this initially is okay. We can change the blend mode to color dodge. That's probably a little bit too bright, so let's change the color of this by double clicking on this, and maybe we want a color like this. Press OK, and let's play around with the blend mode again. So something, maybe even dodge color, and let's change the opacity down a little bit more, and we can always paint in more rim light. Just make sure that your mask is selected, and you can keep painting it in, or you can paint it out if you want, by switching your foreground color from white to black, X on the keyboard, or you can press this double-headed arrow here and just paint it out here. So this is before, this is after. So let's zoom back out. So this is before and this is after. It could do with just a tad bit of fading the opacity down. Now the last thing to do is a very, very subtle adjustment, and that's to do with the noise of the photo. So if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see that the background is a little bit noisy, and although the model layer has also got a little bit noise here, it's not actually consistent with the background. So what we can do is match the noise of the model layer to the background layer. We can do that by adding a noise layer. So just click on your model layer here, and we're going to create a 50% gray layer. So let's click on solid color, and let's go to hue of 0, saturation of 0, brightness of 50%, and let's press OK. And let's change the blend mode from normal to overlay, and what that does is get rid of the 50% gray. And you're wondering, well, why did we do that then? And that's because we only want to capture the next effect. So let's go to our filter, and we're going to introduce some noise. So noise and add noise. And now it's going to ask us to convert to smart object. We do. It's a matter of playing around with the right amount. So if I exaggerate it, 54% is obviously too much. So if I dial it down, maybe somewhere around the 7%, it's an eyeball check. That's this noise here, match the noise here. So something like 7% looks okay. I've got it on uniform and monochromatic, and press OK. So this is the match here. If you ever need to change it, all you need to do, because this is a smart filter, double click on the add noise, and then you can adjust it there. So let me cancel out that and then press Command 0 just to take stock of this photo. Now let's just go over what we did here, because we did do quite a few things. First, we started off with this background layer. Then we added this model here, and we used lines to understand where the perspective is, and where the lines intersect, that's where the horizon line is, and we matched the horizon line of the model layer to the background layer and masked it out. Once we've masked it out, the color looked a bit off, so we adjusted the luminosity, the hue, the saturation, as well as threw in some highlights and rim lights. We also added some noise so the foreground matches the background. And so that's how easy it is. I hope you enjoyed this video or learned something new. Let me know about it by commenting in the comment section, liking this video, subscribing, or hitting the bell icon so you can get notified for when my next video is out.